The plumber called me just before noon, and the second I heard his voice, I knew something was terribly wrong. He sounded shaken in a way grown men rarely do, like he had just seen something he could not process. Then he whispered, "There is a little boy hiding behind the water heater in the basement. He will not come out, and I think he is terrified." My stomach dropped so hard it felt like somebody had punched straight through my chest. I had spent 40 years working around abused children, and deep down, before I even grabbed my keys, I already knew this was about to destroy my family forever. My name is Raymond Carter. I am 68 years old, and until 3 years ago, I worked as a pediatric trauma nurse in Knoxville, Tennessee. Most people think retirement after a career like that feels peaceful, but the truth is you never really stop seeing things the way you were trained to see them. Once you spend decades looking into the eyes of frightened children, your instincts never leave you. You notice bruises other people ignore. You notice hesitation in a child's voice. You notice when a kid glances nervously toward an adult before answering a simple question. I honestly believed retirement meant I could finally stop carrying those instincts around with me. Turns out I was wrong. My son Mason is 35 years old, my only child. After my wife Linda died from breast cancer 12 years ago, it became just the two of us for a long time. We were close back then. Mason called me every Sunday night without fail. Sometimes we talked about football, sometimes fishing, sometimes absolutely nothing important at all, but hearing his voice mattered. Then he met Vanessa Cole, and slowly, almost without me realizing it, my son started slipping away from me one conversation at a time. Vanessa had the kind of personality that swallowed entire rooms the second she walked into them. Everything about her looked polished, expensive, and carefully staged for attention. During the first Thanksgiving dinner she spent at my house, she barely touched her food because she spent most of the evening taking pictures for social media. When I asked if she wanted help carrying dishes into the kitchen, she looked at me like I had interrupted something important. Mason married her less than a year later at some luxury beach resort in Florida. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like family and started feeling like an unwanted guest in my own son's life. A few years after Linda passed away, I decided to move into a smaller place because the old family home felt unbearably quiet. It was a 4-bedroom brick house on Maplewood Drive where Mason had grown up. I offered to let Mason and Vanessa live there rent-free while they saved money for a future house of their own. I kept the property under my name because my attorney recommended it, but honestly, years of watching families fall apart had taught me that paperwork protects people better than promises do. Mason hugged me hard the day I handed him the keys and promised he would never forget what I had done for them. Funny thing about promises, most of them expire faster than milk. The weekly phone calls slowly disappeared after they moved in. Visits became rare. Holidays turned awkward. Vanessa always acted irritated whenever I stopped by, like my presence ruined the image she wanted to create. Eventually, I stopped inviting myself over because nobody likes feeling tolerated inside their own family. So when Mason suddenly called me one Tuesday morning asking for a favor, I already knew exactly why he was reaching out. He told me he and Vanessa were flying to Cancun for 8 days, and there was a plumbing leak upstairs damaging part of the ceiling near the kitchen. He asked if I could arrange for a plumber while they were gone because Vanessa did not want construction noise interrupting their vacation preparations. I remember staring at the crossword puzzle sitting unfinished on my kitchen table while he explained the details. They could afford a luxury resort in Mexico, but somehow calling a plumber themselves before leaving was too inconvenient. I contacted an old friend named Miguel Ramirez. Miguel had worked maintenance at the hospital for years before opening his own plumbing company. He was dependable, patient, and one of the kindest men I had ever known. Sunday morning, I drove over to unlock the house for him using the spare key Mason had hidden under a planter on the front porch. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The house no longer looked like the home where I raised my son. Every room had been redesigned in pale colors that looked more like a staged hotel than a real family home. The walls were covered with framed photos of Mason and Vanessa posing on beaches, inside restaurants, and beside expensive cocktails. There were dozens of pictures everywhere, but not a single one from before Vanessa entered his life. No childhood photos, no family memories, no pictures of Linda. It was like the first 30 years of my son's life had been erased. Then I noticed the basement door. It was locked from the outside. That stopped me cold because who locks a basement from the outside inside their own house? I stood there staring at the handle for several seconds, trying to explain it away in my mind. Before I could think more about it, Miguel pulled into the driveway, so I unlocked the basement and showed him where the leak was coming from before heading home. Around 11:30, my phone rang. Miguel sounded terrified. "Raymond, you need to get back here right now. There is a child down here." Every nerve in my body went tight. I asked him what he meant, and his voice cracked while he explained that he found a little boy hiding behind the water heater wrapped in blankets. The child refused to come out and looked completely terrified. The second Miguel described him, every instinct I spent 40 years developing started screaming inside my head. I drove there faster than I had driven in years. Miguel was waiting outside looking pale and shaken. He told me the boy was still downstairs and had not moved since being discovered. I told Miguel to stay upstairs while I went down alone. The basement felt colder than it should have. Behind the water heater, curled into a narrow space beside the wall, sat a tiny little boy wearing dinosaur pajama pants and an oversized gray shirt. He looked painfully thin. Beside him sat a flashlight, a nearly empty coloring book, and a plastic bowl with dried macaroni stuck to the bottom. But it was his eyes that broke me. They were the eyes of a child trained to stay invisible. I crouched several feet away and introduced myself softly. I kept my hands visible and spoke the same way I had spoken to frightened children inside emergency rooms for decades. Slowly, carefully, he relaxed enough to answer questions in whispers. His name was Oliver. He was 4 years old. And when I gently asked who told him to stay hidden and quiet, he answered with one word: "Vanessa." The room felt like it tilted sideways. Oliver explained everything slowly, carefully, like he was scared saying the wrong thing would get him punished. He told me Vanessa made him stay downstairs whenever guests visited because he was not supposed to appear in pictures or videos. She said he was not part of the brand. Those exact words, "not part of the brand." Then came the sentence that completely shattered me. When I asked where his father was, Oliver quietly said, "Mason is my dad sometimes." I learned right there in that basement that my own son had a child I never even knew existed. Oliver's mother had died years earlier, and somehow Mason and Vanessa had hidden this little boy from the world. They kept him downstairs whenever people came over. They left him there with sandwiches, juice boxes, and strict instructions to stay quiet while they vacationed in Mexico. 8 days. They planned to leave a 4-year-old child alone underground for 8 entire days. I carried Oliver upstairs myself. He weighed almost nothing in my arms. Miguel stood in the kitchen crying openly while I made the child peanut butter sandwiches. Oliver devoured them so quickly it made me physically sick to watch. After he finished eating, I called 911. The investigation moved fast after that. Police photographed the basement setup, the mini refrigerator stocked with rationed food, and the calendar counting down until Mason and Vanessa returned from Cancun. Doctors confirmed severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, vitamin deficiencies, and signs of long-term neglect. Legally speaking, it was almost like Oliver had disappeared from existence years earlier. Then investigators uncovered the financial records. Mason had been collecting survivor benefits and trust payments intended for Oliver's care after his mother's death. Thousands of dollars had been drained from the account and spent on luxury car payments, cosmetic treatments, vacations, and Vanessa's social media lifestyle business. My own son had stolen money meant to feed his child while pretending to live some glamorous online fantasy. That realization killed something inside me. The same basement where I once taught Mason woodworking as a little boy had become a prison for my grandson. The next morning, I hired the best family attorney in Knoxville and filed for emergency guardianship. I handed investigators everything they needed: medical reports, financial records, witness statements, photos of the basement, social media archives. Every single piece of evidence buried Mason and Vanessa deeper. Mason finally called me from Cancun after authorities contacted him. He sounded panicked and furious. He demanded to know what I had done. I sat quietly at my kitchen table gripping the phone while he yelled. Then I finally answered him. "I answered a phone call from a plumber who found your son living behind a water heater." He immediately started screaming that Oliver belonged to him and that I had no right to interfere. I let him finish before calmly telling him the locks had already been changed and law enforcement would be waiting when he returned home. The court battle lasted nearly a year. Vanessa accepted a plea deal that left her with a felony record and strict restrictions around children. Mason fought the charges and lost everything: child neglect, financial exploitation, child endangerment, prison. During sentencing, The judge looked directly at my son and said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You treated your child like an inconvenience instead of a human being. I sold the house on Maplewood Drive shortly afterward because I could not walk into that basement again without seeing Oliver curled beside that water heater trying to stay silent enough to survive. Instead, I bought a small cottage near an elementary school with a fenced backyard and a swing set nearby. Oliver lives with me now. He is 6 years old today. He laughs loudly now. He eats pancakes every Saturday morning. He sleeps with a dinosaur nightlight glowing beside his bed. For months after moving in, he used to apologize whenever he asked for food because he thought eating too much made adults angry. The first time I heard him laugh without fear, I had to walk into another room because I could not stop myself from crying. One night while I tucked him into bed, he looked at me quietly and said, "I think you are my real dad now." I kissed his forehead and told him I would be whatever he needed for the rest of my life. People sometimes ask whether I regret turning my own son in. My answer never changes. My family was already broken long before I made that phone call. It broke the moment my son allowed a little boy to believe he deserved to live hidden underground because he was not pretty enough for social media. I spent 40 years learning how to recognize fear in children. I just never imagined the most important child I would ever save would be my own grandson. So if you take anything away from my story tonight, let it be this. Pay attention to the quiet kids. Listen carefully to what children are trying not to say. Sometimes the worst suffering hides in plain sight, waiting for one person brave enough to notice it.